Hello everyone, my name is Amandeep Modgill. I'm Azure and AWS certified. Today I'm going to take you through ExpressRoute and we're going to do a bit deep dive. I hope you have your gears ready. Let's get into it. So today's agenda is we're going to initially talk about what is ExpressRoute. We're going to look at some of the fundamentals. Then we'll look at the gateway types, um, and then the route types and what are the connectivity options in Azure Express Route. And in the connectivity options, there are a couple I would like to go into a bit more detail, like global reach. And we'll talk about that. Then we're going to talk about routing concepts, which will help you understand how you can configure it and what are the options in terms of routing for Express Route. We'll also talk about a little bit about the fast path, as the name signifies. It lets you go a little bit fast in terms of the destination you want to go into Azure. And then at the end, we will summarize. Just a disclaimer, all the pictures and diagrams and stuff, most of it is taken from Microsoft Documents, Microsoft Learn, or the GitHub community, especially the Microsoft one. Okay, so let's talk about what is ExpressRoute. It is a private dedicated link between you and Microsoft. Now, you can say the provider as per the diagram up here at the bottom. Let me get the laser out so I can point to it. So over here, the provider, I sometimes call them as resellers. So these are mostly the ISPs in respective countries, so internet service providers. So for example, in Australia, it is Telstra, Optus, and so on, like Equinix. Whereas in US, for example, it's a AT&T. Um, so what are the why you want to actually put an express route when you can access most of it through the internet? Obviously, it is high throughput, so you're not dependent on the speed of the internet. You commit to, let's say, 50 MB for up to 100 gig plan on the express route. The performance is predictable, means if you have certain applications, for example, Office 365, Dynamics 365, or you have an app configured which is consumed internally within the firm or your organization or your company, then you don't want to impact the performance of the app because 10,000 users are trying to access it and your internet can't just cope with it. Well, it is secure. Um, Obviously, because it's more like a tunnel, between you and Microsoft, and obviously the provider or the intermediator or the reseller is the entity which established that handshake between you and Microsoft. There is an exception to it in terms of establishing that handshake, and we'll talk about that further in this session. It helps you lower the cost. I would say if there is a lot of ingress, egress, you know, then you need to look at the different type of options available to you ExpressRoute, and you can certainly fine tune and reap the benefit in terms of lower cost. Um, there are both the options available to you, metered and unlimited data plans. We'll talk about those in the presentation further. And you can't have overlapping IP range. So there is obviously an exception to that as well. So for example, if you have a set of IP range used on premise, you cannot use the same IP range if the VNet's connected to your network. And the exception to that we'll talk about further as well in detail. So for example, in terms of the exception in this particular case over here, that would be when you have that VNet or not connected to your on-premise network, and that's the exception. And there is a way to configure that in the hub and spoke model. We'll have a look into that down the track. Now, some of the fundamentals I'd like you to be aware of. So the first one is Microsoft Edge device, aka more like a router with ports. And you will see that in another picture I have after this one. But this Edge device is, I would say, it's not certainly, not really most of the time located in the same, data center. It could be somewhere close to the data center. It could be, I don't really know, but I heard that it may or may not exist where the data center is. Right? But this Edge device lets you connect to Microsoft. So most of the time from this Edge device, the partner Edge is connected with the high availability. So there is a primary and secondary connection. So this HA you get by default if you are connected through the partner Edge. Right? From the partner Edge to your network, there is also a HA available to you. And that there is a logical HA and there is a physical HA. So I'll talk about that in a minute. So let's have a look at the detailed diagram. So over here, so this is your Azure space where you're doing things and have the VMs, and you have a web tier, a business tier, and a data tier for an app. You then have an ExpressRoute gateway. Well, and you have a gateway on your on-premise network. Now, what happens is there are certainly instructions available on Microsoft documents which tells you how to configure this gateway and how to configure this bit, and then you got to pass on the details to the provider or the reseller. Provider is the right word. I call them sometimes resellers. Reseller is not the right word. Provider is the right word. Now, these providers will work with you. They will ask you for some certain details, and they will establish this trusted connection between you and so they will help you establish that trusted connection between you and Microsoft. Hello? हाँ
नहीं सो रहा वो, इसने दूध पी लिया, आ जाओ यहाँ पे।
ओके, जरा 2 मिनट करो, मैं रिकॉर्डिंग कर रहा हूँ अपनी वीडियो की. Okay, right. So what happens is, as I told you guys before, that there is that high availability. As you can see, there are a couple of routers, and you are probably subscribing to one of the ports. And the provider probably has leased a chunk of data from Microsoft. So let's say I have a company called Amandeep, ISP. I have subscribed for 100 gig from Microsoft, and I am a provider or a reseller. I then sold it to you 1 gig plan. Whereas, I may carve it out into, slice and dice that 100 gig into multiple plans, right? So that's that option available to you through the reseller. There is another option. We'll talk about that in the slides down the track. That option is direct, where you don't go through the provider. Okay. Now, I spoke about the high availability. I spoke about the physical and logical, but I didn't mention how they are different from each other. So logical is where you're getting from the provider to your site, you're getting a secondary connection logically over the same fiber, but on a different on the same fiber, you're getting two connections logically segregated. So that's one way of looking at it. The other way is when you're getting actually two fibers coming in and you have the two kind of physical segregation of that high availability connection coming to your premises. So that is something you can check with the provider, and they will let you know whether it's a logical or a physical. The other thing you can keep, you need to probably be aware of is you can mix providers. So, for example, in Australia, there is Telstra, there is Optus, and others. So, if in certain region out there in another country you would like to set up an express route in your office, then obviously Telstra or AT&T is not available. Then you can, for example, in Europe, I don't know what. So let's say there is a ISP provider called Fed Telecom. So then you can set up an express route with Fred Telecom in Europe. It's not an issue. You can also certainly peer Dynamics 365, Office 365, and Azure traffic, obviously, through the express route, if you like. The Dynamics 365, Office 365 peering is you probably need to know the IP ranges of the services you are hitting, and it sometimes changes, so you need to work with your account manager from Microsoft to understand, or maybe check online and see if you can find the details. And you can certainly peer that so that the Office 365 and Dynamics 365 goes over Express Route through a private link rather than internet. You can connect up to 10 VNets to the standard Express route. You can increase it, obviously, by raising the support request to Microsoft. Now let's have a look at the Express route gateways. There are two types of gateways. So there's VPN and Express route. As our context or conversation or point of conversation is Express route, so I won't go much into the detail of VPN. Let's talk about Express route in further details. So there are three type of gateways. So there is standard, premium, and ultra. And yeah, 1 AZ is standard, and it has a bandwidth of 1 gig. Premium has 2 AZ. Rest of the naming convention is the same, and it has 2 gig bandwidth. Whereas ultra is 3 AZ, but it has 10 gig bandwidth. So that's something you probably want to keep in mind, depending upon how much throughput you need and what you're designing for, and things like that. In terms of VPN, just touching a little bit on it, there is point-to-site VPN, there is site-to-site VPN, and VNet to VNet. So that's more of a communication between two VNets. The point-to-site is when, for example, you have an admin who's working remotely and you want that admin to come in via a secure tunnel. That is one use case. Site-to-site is as simple as Express route, but you don't want to use Express route. You want to use VPN type of connection, then that's where you will use this one. Okay. Now, in terms of Express route gateway upgrades, you certainly can do that. You can use a PowerShell command. That's the easiest way to do it. But there is an exception, and that is ultra performance. So if you have standard and you want to upgrade to premium, you certainly can do that through PowerShell. But if you have any of those two and you want to upgrade to ultra, you need to actually recreate the gateway. So keep that in mind. You should not, it's highly recommended, you should not put any other type of VMs in the gateway subnet. And the gateway subnet must be named gateway subnet. Let me show you the picture I had on slide number 1. I'm talking about this subnet over here. Right? This subnet must be named gateway subnet. That's a requirement. Now, you can, if you want to, you can deploy a high availability setup for your gateway, and I will show you the so this is the high availability setup. You have an instance 1 of the gateway, you have an instance 2 of the gateway, and with the availability zones available to you now in Azure, you can set up a HA for your gateway if you like. It is recommended that you should do that. It's easy to do, easy to set up, and peace of mind, because you don't want a single point of failure, which is just one gateway. All right, let's talk about the express route types. before we get into the express route type, I would like you guys to uh, have a quick look at this picture. These are the 7 layers. When we sometimes talk about, this is layer 7, which is up here, the application layer, layer 6, type of networking, and most of the time the express route operates in these 2 layers. So layer 2 and layer 3, which is the networking layer and the data link layer. Uh, that's the reason. If you want to, this is not a networking session. If you'd like to have a detailed look at it, I would recommend you to go to just look up online on Google for OSI, 7 layers, and have a read about it. But as the name signifies, the data link layer and the network layer is the layer we are going to talk about in here. Right? So in terms of express route type, so there is that cloud exchange co-location type, and there is point-to-point Ethernet connection between your site and Microsoft, and this is any-to-any IP VPN connection. Right? So these 2 connections over here, which is the service, these 3 connections in orange, service provider model, they operate in layer 2 and 3. So if I go back, that means they operate in the network layer and the data link layer, whereas the IP VPN operates in layer 3, which is the network layer only. And again, the direct model operates in layer 2 and 3 as well. We're going to talk about the direct model in further details, so in the connectivity options. So let's have a look. So in the express route connectivity options, there is a model called local. And what this one does is, let's say you have an office in LA and Microsoft has an edge location in LA or in the US West, which is local to LA. Right? And what you do is you sign up a local express route, which lets you connect your network to just to this region. Right? And the benefit of it is high throughput. You can sign up for unlimited data, or not a metered express route. And that's the exception we spoke about in earlier slides. And in the same fashion, you can have another, express route local in the secondary on your another site. So let's talk about the next one. Next one is geopolitical region. So if we talk about Australia, in Australia there are 3 Azure regions. So there is Australia East, Australia Southeast, and Australia Central. The Australia Central region is the government region. So whereas the East and the Southeast is available to almost everyone. Now that is the geopolitical region. So these 3 regions falls in that geopolitical region, and you can sign up for that type of express route where you are allowed to make connections in that political region. Then we talk about the premium. Premium lets you connect uh, across any region available on the Microsoft network. So it could be in a you may have one set up in Australia East, and then you have one express route set up in your Europe office. So for that, you need premium connection, premium express route connectivity. We're going to deep dive into the global reach, so for the time being, I'm going to skip it. Right? But let's talk about direct. We talked about this particular picture in our previous section. But what direct does, it lets you kind of bypass that reseller. Right? So for the direct, you have an option to go up to 100 gig. And although you still be kind of using the airspace of the ISP, because you need that connectivity. So you need to, use that. How do I put it in words? So if you want to take your flight from your network and fly over to the Microsoft Edge network, then you need access to that airspace, and that is what the provider will still provide you, but it's not through them. It's more of like a fiber optic between you and Microsoft. Right? Okay, and I think for the direct you have from 10 gig to up to 100 gig connection available to you. Now, the global reach I skipped, so let's talk about that. So what global reach lets you do is, let's say you have an office in San Francisco and you have an office in London. So you have an express route in both the locations which connects you to your respective Azure regions, right? Now, what you want to do is you want to use Microsoft um, space to connect these two offices with each other. And that is what Global Reach lets you do. So it's more of a connectivity between the express route in San Francisco to the express route in London. And that's through, I have another picture, so let me pull that one up. So let's say this is your, it has a different location, but similar concept. So you have an office in Tokyo, you have an office in Hong Kong, and you are using the Microsoft backbone network to connect between offices instead of you setting up your dedicated network. Um, so the one thing to note in the global reach is you will be paying for ingress, egress, both. It's not part of your express route billing, it's separate to it. So you'll be paying on top of what you pay for the express route. Okay. And the other thing is you will be paying for both ingress and egress. So that's another key thing to keep in mind. Okay, now we're going to look into the routing concepts, and that is required because that is something you must know to understand how ExpressRoute will channel your traffic and how you can effectively use the ExpressRoute. Well, it works more on the on a concept called weightage or priority, right? So if I be talking to the networking guys, they will know what I mean exactly by that. Um, so I think I have a diagram here to explain. Okay, so here, right? So what happens is if you have two express routes, right, and you have, okay, let's look at the picture and let me show you what I mean. So you have an express route here set up between your, in your US LA with the US West region. You have another express route between your New York and the US East office, right? Now, over here, you can see the weightage is 400 for 13.100.0.0/16, and the 23.100.0.60/16 is 100 weightage. Over here is the other way around. Now, if you look at the weightage 400, that is local to this express route in a way. So that's CIDR. So that's the IP range assigned to the US East by the networking team for that particular company, right? Over here, the IP range assigned to the US West is 13.100.0.0/16, and the weightage for that is 400. So what it means is if all these two express routes are up and running, the LA office will channel his traffic through to US West directly through that express route because of the weightage. And similarly, the local traffic from here will go directly to the US East. Now, what happens if one of these goes down, right? So let's assume this particular express route in the LA office is not operating, right? In that case, based on the weightage, the LA office will take the internal backbone. It'll go through the express route of the US East, flick across to the US West. So that way, the advantage is, you're using local, which obviously will have a better performance, and also you may have an active express route for DR, but you because it's active, you want to use both of them, and you want that traffic from that office to be channeled through this one. But in case if that goes down, you want to channel it through that one. So you can set it up based on weightage. Okay, now this is the last topic. This is fast path. Now, how? Okay, why would you need fast path? Right. What fast path does is if you remember the first diagram where we had the gateway, right, or in the Azure space, and we had the gateway local on premise, right? What happens is when you're trying to reach to a VM, let's talk about a VM, for example, for argument's sake, it will channel that traffic via the express route to the gateway and then to the VM, which means more hops. Right? Now, if you want to speed up that process, you can subscribe to FastPath. And what it lets you do is let you bypass the gateway, and it goes directly to the VM. Right? It still requires the gateway in place, and it only supports the ultra performance because it needs to quickly resolve what path it needs to take, and that's why it's only available for that. There is a catch though, it does not support UDR, so user defined routes. It does not support on the gateway subnet, means if you have that defined, it will still follow that UDR, means that the fast path will not kind of overtake that UDR you have defined and map it directly. If you have a VNet peering between the VNets, that again will go through the gateway. Now, basic load balancer, if you have that set up and you're using between your on-premise and your Azure space, that won't work. So the option is to move to standard. And on-premise to the private endpoint will also go through the gateway, and fast path will not kind of play any role in there. Okay, that's it for today, guys. So let's summarize. We spoke about providers, which I was calling resellers. Those guys lease, 100 gig or more or so, and they slice and dice, divide it into little packages for different companies, and they act as a reseller in a way, but they help you establish the handshake between you and Microsoft. Customer is you guys, and Microsoft obviously HA for some of the components, for example, between Microsoft and provider, between provider and your site. That's done by default. Gateways are required. You may want to consider availability zone. And remember, we spoke about high availability for gateways. You don't want a single point of failure. We talked about express route types. And then we talked about routing options, how to put the weightage or priority on your routing so you can send the local traffic. And if that local express route fails, it'll automatically channel through to your secondary office and the secondary express route. But the secondary express route may be secondary for Office 1, but for Office 2, it's the primary, if you know what I mean. Fast path, We talked about just a few seconds ago, we were talking about FastPath, and it helps you bypass the traffic, but obviously there is an exception. There are a few exceptions, not all the traffic, but most of it. Well, beautiful guys, that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you.